Welcome again, everyone. So, I'm glad to see that there was a generally positive response to yesterday's lesson, so thank you for your effort and keep it up. And I'm glad to see that most of you did not have any problems with the Google Forms. Just one thing, I haven't encountered it yet, but I know the temptation is strong. Do not copy-paste from the internet. Now, mostly because it's useless, okay? I will most likely find out, and you will have learned absolutely nothing, okay? Defeating all the effort we're all putting into this. What you can do instead is read the content of a website and rephrase it using your own words, writing down what you understood. Because in order to rephrase something effectively, you need to understand its content. This is literally how most historians do secondary research. You read someone else's work, take notes on how that work can be useful for you, and then rephrase it and stick a footnote in it. Once you've done that, lo and behold, plagiarism magically turns into research. So please, do not plagiarize. Now, back to the Civil War. Today we will be looking at the three main causes of the war, and we will be looking in particular at the political causes. Let me tell you in advance that this is a bit complicated, and to understand them properly you might need some background knowledge. And if at any point there is something that you don't understand, feel free to refer to the videos I linked in the online resources. There is a video on the bicameral Congress in the United States, or do your own research. Also, the video in the channel Oversimplified, which is also linked in the transcript, is also pretty good at explaining it. Now, the three causes we are looking at today are, first, slavery. Second, the intricacies of the American federal system. Third, the issue of states' rights. Now, how do I put it? Let's start with slavery. Now, as we said, slavery was the backbone of the economy of the southern states, those that would later become the Confederates. Now, slavery was in fact so important that it will have its own lesson tomorrow. But just to give you an idea, about 1/3 of the population, around 3 million people over a total of 9 million, were slaves with no rights. So 1 in 3 persons in the South was a slave. Without the with the South, while the South needed slavery to survive, a strong abolitionist is a kind of movement that wants to abolish slavery, started to emerge in the industrial North, which saw slavery as A, immoral, against morality and religious morality. Remember, the United States were and are very religious, and also if you're not religious, you probably will easily understand why keeping a human being as essentially a talking tool is something immoral, okay, that goes against the values of our society. And B, economically obsolete and counterproductive, because why would you have slaves when you could have happy factory workers who spend their hard-earned dollars buying stuff and making everyone richer? Meanwhile, the Southerners not only saw it as the right, the blacks being seen as inferior people, but also as an integrant part of their identity and of their economy. It was a part of who they were as a community and of how they were able to bring bread to the table. Okay? They were not able to imagine a life in the South without slaves, but we'll talk about that more in detail tomorrow. Slavery became such an important part in the political debate of the United States in what deciding which kind of things were discussed and how, that eventually two main factions emerged within the US Congress. Free states, on the one hand, where slavery was banned by the state constitution, okay? There was a United States Constitution on top, and each state, get there in a minute, had their own constitution, their own set of rules. And then we got, on the other part, slave states, where slavery was allowed, also by the state constitution. As in all political struggles, both parties tried to maintain a careful balance between them until everything fell apart miserably, which leads us to the next topic, the intricacies of the federal system. Now, the United States are a federation. They emerged not as a single country all at once, like France, nor were they the product of a country conquering and subjugating all of its neighbors, like the United Kingdom, which was essentially England conquering first Wales, then Ireland, and eventually uniting with Scotland. No, they emerged as a union of states, hence the name United States, under a single federal government, the one in Washington, D.C. And this federal government, at the time of the Civil War, nobody really knew what it could or could not do. But we'll get there in a second when talking about states' rights. Now, the things we need to understand, without going too much into detail, is how decisions are taken in the United States. First of all, it's a bicameral system. Now, bi means two, as in bicycle, which literally means two cycles, two wheels, because a bicycle has two wheels, last time I checked, and camera, which means chamber. And yes, there is a rather interesting connection between the camera you use to take pictures and the word chamber, but I'll let you look it up for yourselves. In a bicameral system, for a law to be enacted, it usually needs to pass through both chambers. Okay, there are two chambers. In Britain, we got the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Britain is slightly different, but in order for a law to be passed and to become a law in the entire country, it needs to be approved by both chambers. So, in the American bicameral system, there are two chambers. The lower chamber, which is which represents the unity of the nation, okay? Not the single part, but the entire United States, and which is roughly equivalent to our House of Commons. It is called the House of Representatives. There, the states with the larger population have more delegates. Very simply. So today, for example, the crowded and very rich state of California had 53 representatives, while Alabama, which is almost empty, only has 7. And then we got the upper chamber, the Senate. Okay? The Senate, upper chamber, sort of the equivalent of our House of Lords-ish. It represents the interest of the single states that make up the federation, okay? There, all states are equal, and each state has 2 delegates, 2 senators. And simple enough, right? Now, the problem with this system is that it easily broke down if the majority in one house was different from the majority in the other house. So, for example, in 1850, while as the constitutional crisis, as the constitutional and political debate over slavery was reaching its peak, each chamber had a different majority. There were the free states, more crowded and wealthier, 22 million people, so a higher number of representatives, and they controlled the House of Representatives. On the other hand, the slave states were smaller, had a smaller population, but there were more of them. There were 17 of them, while there were only 15 free states. So the slave states controlled the majority in the Senate. Now, this made any attempt at sorting out the issue of slavery through political means, through institutional means, without having to shoot each other, almost impossible to achieve. Okay, it was a very heartfelt issue. Even before the war, people were acting very violently because of this issue. Several compromises were made to avoid a crisis spiraling down into a full blown-out civil war. But looking at the situation with hindsight, which is the superpower of every good historian, a civil war was more or less inevitable due to the system by which decisions were made. This political deadlock in Congress, in which nothing could be achieved because the free states controlled the House of Representatives while the slave states controlled the Senate, led eventually to the unilateral secession of the southern states. They decided by themselves, you know what, we're forming our own United States with slavery and cotton, and they left the Union, okay? In order to get them back, the Unionists in the north declared war on them. This leads us to this connects somehow to the issue of states' rights. Another perk of the federal system of the United States is that each state wanted, especially at the time, a lot of autonomy from the central federal government. They want to decide which taxes to pay. They want to decide what to teach in schools. There was a recent debate about whether evolution should be taught in schools in certain southern states. And at the time, they wanted to decide whether or not black people should be treated as animals rather than human beings. In later works, and the key word here is later, the secession of the southern states was framed as the attempt to fight against the intrusions of a tyrannical national government which wanted to impose its will on a number of proudly independent southern states. This was usually done in order to fight the Unionist propaganda, the Unionist point of view, supported by Lincoln himself throughout the war, that the Civil War was done to abolish slavery rather than to punish the seceding states. Okay? The war was fought over the issue of slavery, but initially it was an attempt by the Unionist government in Washington to get those states back into the fold. Okay? If later on slavery was mentioned as the main justifying reason. And you have to remember that those states left because they were not allowed to have slaves. So again, it was an attempt to put a positive spin on the whole situation after the war mostly, but it did have a grain of truth. In the 1850s, the limits of the power of the federal government over the state's government, so of the national government over the local governments, was not as well defined as they are today. And the federal government was trying to strengthen itself at the expenses of the state's government. And there were indeed many members of the southern elites, or the people who controlled the southern states, who resented the orders sent by those Yankees back in Washington, D.C. It was certainly not the main cause of the war, but it did contribute to increasing the tensions, and the tension eventually exploded into all-out war. Now, those are the facts, the three main causes of the American Civil War. Slavery, clearly, the intricacies of the federal system and the fact that it was deadlocked, okay? And finally, the issue of states' rights. Now it's your turn to answer the question, what were the causes of the Civil War? Use the video, use the transcript, and post it online. Good luck, and see you next time.